Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, our very own Alan got caught in the wake of a data breach, and he'll share the details of that story. Plus, in the recent weeks, Sony Online has been under 10 separate attacks, and the details about these attacks are absolutely fascinating, and of course, we've got them for you. Then after that, it's a whole new batch of your questions and my near-disaster war story that I'm finally ready to share with you. All that and more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to TechSNAP. My name is Chris, and joining me on the Skype line there is Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to TechSNAP. Alan, and welcome back to you. Alan is my co-host here on the show that goes really deep into tech topics. We like to go through some of the news stories and tech events that have happened, sort of look at the big picture topics and dig into details you might know about, not have heard about them, or maybe find a few stories that have flied under the radar. Plus, one of the other things we've started doing recently is taking your questions and trying to give you our answers. And we want you to send those in to us. So right up at the top here, we're going to give a plug for our email address, which is techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. We want to get your show ideas, news story suggestions, and things like that. Alan, I don't know if you saw this. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, if you send us your questions, then we can answer them. And if you see stories that you want us to cover, send it in, and we'll take a look at it.
And Alan, we've gotten a few that are pretty good, and we've got a whole bunch coming up later on in this episode. So I think what we'll probably do is we've got a bulk of some news stories that are really pretty interesting that we'll tear through. Just a couple of them this week, actually. Yep. We've got a ton of Q&A to go through. Well, a ton that we've got, but we're only going to cover a couple of them in this episode. And then at the end of the episode, I am going to tell my war story that I've been kind of going over and replaying in my mind for the last couple of days in preparation for this show. So I've been reliving the torture just for this event, so I'm looking forward to it. Do you want to jump into... Oh, actually, before we go, I also wanted to... Before we go right to the news, I wanted to give a mention that we're thinking about moving the release date of... Well, we are going to move the release date of TechSNAP to Fridays over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. And
so you can get it sooner.
Yeah, that's kind of like the number one piece of feedback I think we've gotten is love the show, but can you give it to us sooner? So we're going to do that. We record this live on Thursdays, which we also kind of want to get your opinion on. So we've put a link in the show notes for a poll over on our Facebook page. We're trying to get a feel for what you guys think is a good time for us to do the show live. Right now, we do it at 1 p.m. Pacific on Thursdays over at jblive.tv, and then it'll be releasing Friday mornings over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. So go over to that Facebook poll if you are a Facebook member and vote on what you think would be a good time for TechSNAP to be live, because really we're pretty flexible, and we want to know what's best for you guys, because there's also a live chat. Well, that's not the right shot. Boy, that's I'm just all kinds of messed up. That's we have a live chat room too that joins us and shares their thoughts while we go. Yep. All right, Alan, that's all the plug-in I've got.
If you don't have Facebook, you can just email us.
Yeah, totally. And we're not going to do all our polls forever on Facebook. In fact,
it required no setup to do one. So.
Yeah, and we also kind of want to let people know we have a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/TechSNAP. I've recently started using PollDaddy, though, and they have a really nice integration with WordPress where you just, if you have the PollDaddy plugin, you just put put in brackets PollDaddy equals and then the PollDaddy poll number and bracket, and boom, you've just got a poll built right into your WordPress post. So that's really slick too. So we'll probably use that too, but we're just giving the Facebook page a little love as we get going. Speaking of getting going, Alan, do you want to cover on our first story here? It kind of applies to you directly, which was kind of interesting. So I'll let you take it.
All right. So it came out actually yesterday, on Wednesday, that DirectAdmin, which is control panel software for Unix web hosting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like cPanel, but different. Specifically, it's more customizable, and they have little scripts that fire before and after every event, so you can customize it to work however you want it to.
So you use this in the sense of like if you're providing service to your customers and they want a control panel.
Yes. So we provide it on our shared web hosting server, our regular one that we do for really small customers, and we also resell licenses for it to people that rent servers from us.
So what happened?
And the other advantage that DirectAdmin has is that it supports BSD as well as...
especially important to you.
Yes. But specifically what happened is someone managed to compromise their main web server and gain access to their customer database, which included name, address, email, username, password.
Oh, no. So that means you.
Yes. Specifically, though, the billing information was not compromised.
Oh.
Because they specifically architected their payment system. They use a gateway so that when you go and make a payment, either through PayPal or directly with a credit card,
Sure.
you do that through a third-party payment processor, so that information never passes through their server. And even the owners of the company don't have access to your credit card information. They just see that customer order number this paid this amount of money.
So
Right?
nice and insulated.
So kind of like PayPal. And so the advantage to them is it didn't require them to get an SSL certificate and to do PCI compliance and all this other stuff. And in this case, what it meant was that while somebody managed to steal their customer database, they didn't get any credit cards or billing information.
That's good. And they were also just kind of going over some of the links you have in the show notes. It looks like they were pretty straightforward with their
Yes.
customers. They've got some forum posts in here where they're answering questions directly, and it seems really good.
But specifically what happened was the people that compromised the server managed to also upload some of their own code and run a script that emailed everybody in the customer database telling them that there was an exploit for DirectAdmin and that they should click this link to find out more.
Oh, no.
And that link took them to some spyware or malware that would infect their system and maybe install something like a keylogger and some other stuff like that on their computer.
It's always more than just me.
Right, but it was a very, very specifically targeted phishing attack because they had your real name that you had given this company. They had the right email address. And even if you went and checked the headers, the email came from
them.
The DirectAdmin servers. So
that would fool me.
Completely legitimate.
Yeah, that would fool me.
Legitimate.
Wow.
And the name of the fake website they set up was meant to look like a security company. It was like, I forget what the link was, but it was meant to look like a real security company's post about it.
So they were trying to get you to go to their site and put in like credit card information and whatnot. They weren't like trying to install software?
It wasn't phishing. It was when you went to this link, it would use a PDF exploit to actually compromise your system.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So they were specifically targeting people who have admin access on thousands of web servers.
Right.
And because they got this specific database, they were able to target those people specifically with the real names and from an email that they might even be expecting to get.
Well, that makes sense why they go after a company like this. That's a good target audience to nail. And you want that. Those are the people you want to get. I mean, because who knows, once you get onto their system, who knows where you could get to from there.
Yes. And luckily, the way that DirectAdmin does its build server, because they provide binaries of their application that people run on their servers, right? Luckily, they do that on a separate server that has separate authentication.
Oh.
And the key that they sign their updates with is not hosted on their server.
Pure Cool in the chat room thinks this is next generation phishing. Do you consider this to be? Is it like one part phishing, one part Trojan?
It's what you call spear phishing, right? It's phishing for specific things instead of just blanket emailing everybody. Like I always laugh when I get phishing emails for like American banks. It's like,
you're right.
I'm not American. I don't bank at Bank of America.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's the same thing like when I get ones from banks that like I obviously have never had any kind of dealings with, and it's always worded badly, but this kind of stuff, see, the tells for all of those for me are always generally it's, you can almost tell immediately by the wording, but also the domain that it comes from. That's almost always a tell, and I think you touched on that.
If they fake it, then you use SPF and domain keys and stuff like that to verify. But this one passed because it was sent from a server that was specifically authorized to send mail for that domain.
It's kind of a very sophisticated attack in the sense that you have to know that you can compromise the source origin server in order to make the rest of it all really work.
Exactly.
So it's almost like you have to sort of identify who you can attack and then build your entire approach around that once you have that identified.
Yes, and it seems like they might have managed to make this compromise a little sooner than people found out. Because the only way people were tipped off that this system was compromised was when they got an email that was obviously
right. And then they got contacted by their own customers, you think?
Yeah, that's what happened. And people were like, "Did you send this email? What's wrong?" And because his link doesn't say what's wrong with DirectAdmin, but it turns out there wasn't anything wrong with it. It was just their web server.
Could you imagine as a service provider getting emails like that and how you would your gut would just go, oh no. I mean, that's just awful.
Oh shit.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's my bad.
And what else did they get while they were in my system, right?
Right. And then you got to start that process.
What a lot of people were concerned about was the hackers modifying a version of DirectAdmin and putting it on the update server so that people that updated their DirectAdmin because they saw this warning about a potential exploit, if you update your copy of Directed Man and you get one that's been compromised, now they have this app running as root on your server. Right? Somebody could make a backdoor in the next version of Directed Man and put it up on the update server.
Oh, no. You're not worried about that, though, are you?
Luckily, their build server is a separate server. And
good policy.
They use cryptographic keys to sign their updates. Yep. And they don't keep the key for signing it in the same place as they keep the code. And
you hope that their build server uses a different set of usernames and passwords than the server that they compromised already. Right?
You would hope.
Yeah, you'd hope so. Anything else on the story before we jump to the next one?
Nope, that's about it.
All right, well, that's interesting, and sorry to hear about the bad news there, Alan, but it sounds like it could have been worse.
Yeah, they didn't get much from me, because it was actually another customer of mine's account that got the first copy of Directed Man, and then I bought my account through them because
so you even
got a discount on the lifetime.
You were one step removed even, so that's good.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, next... Oh, go ahead.
I was concerned about it because I do run a copy of Directed Man on one of my servers.
Sure, and you want to make sure it's not compromised.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, so the next story is interesting because TechSNAP's been following really all of this drama since pretty much our very beginning, and it's probably becoming one of the most amazing hack stories in the history of online attacks. I mean, it really is just evolved into something like we've never seen before. And of course, I'm talking about the new Sony online entertainment hacks that have been going around for, it's just the main breach was just the beginning. It was just the start.
And that was over a month ago now. It was like May 16th, I think, when it started.
So you've outlined,
or April 16th.
In the show notes here, you've outlined 10 separate attacks that have...
10 separate sites or services that have been compromised at Sony.
Wow. And Alan...
And as far as we know, most of them have been by separate groups, not the same people.
That, Alan, that right there, okay, so we've got potentially 10 separate attacks by potentially 10 separate groups that attack 10 separate divisions of Sony or sub-corporations, and doing the poking around, it looks like these different divisions aren't all using like some sort of Sony-wide system that would just, you break it once and you've got everywhere, but they're actually going after different types of software packages at these different attacks.
Yeah. A lot of the attacks were similar in being SQL injection attacks.
Yeah, sort of low-hanging fruit.
It's not clear whether those were, it was all the same software or not, but it is clear that they were not by the same people. So whether it was two different people finding the same exploit around the same time, or if it was just everybody grabbed a different target and wailed on it until they got in.
The end result here is you're talking about 77 million customer records that have been stolen through this process. And it starts really on February 16th when this first online web chatter starts up about, hey, we've got Sony kind of a thing. And it doesn't happen until April 17th on a Sunday. I remember I just got done recording last when we found out that Sony didn't shut down the PlayStation Network until April 17th. But since then, Alan, it has been a series. You have a great infographic.
That's when it got hacked. They didn't shut it down until the 20th, and they didn't tell the customers until the 26th.
Right. And if you look at this timeline infographic that Alan includes in the show notes, it just, after that first hack, there's that first hack, and then there's this long window of events where nothing really happens. And then once around mid-April, starting at April 17th, going down to pretty much today, it is just a series of consecutive attacks against Sony from different groups in different areas. And, we still don't really know who's responsible. Some people have named anonymous. Other people are starting to think maybe now they're hacker groups for hire, which is an interesting theory.
Yep.
And I guess one interesting thing to put in perspective is while the leak of 77 million records is absolutely astonishing, doesn't beat 7-Eleven's leak that happened a while back where they leaked 135 million records. So Sony's still not the top dog. But Alan, the idea that maybe some sort of corporate sponsor is organizing these wide variety of groups and pulling their strings to do some sort of single campaign against Sony, I find it flawed for two reasons. The first reason I find it flawed is this is a generalization and a stereotype, but these don't seem like the type of groups that generally lend themselves to large, organization. It kind of seems like to go against their overall anarchy spirit to be organized. But maybe they don't know. Maybe that's all insulated. But you'd think by now, when they start hearing of each other's attacks, they would start putting it together. The other thing is that if now, since this started happening back in April, Sony immediately involved the FBI. And it seems like if you're involved with this and you're a company and the FBI found out that you orchestrated this kind of thing, you would be just grilled. And so
Yes.
I don't really see a company, at least not in the U.S., maybe
Right.
maybe a Chinese company or something like that potentially, but nothing in the U.S. going after this.
I
But
don't think so.
that said, dude, is this really all just because they were kicking HB Gary when he was down and they went after him like animals, and now the internet is just pissed?
It's hard to say.
I mean, have you ever seen anything like this?
Not quite on this scale, but part of
No.
it is probably Sony's own fault, just because all their systems were horribly managed and just nobody bothered. No one had any reason to target, Sony Music of Indonesia before.
Right.
And then everybody's like, hey, let's hate on Sony. And
That's
then,
really what it is, right? Is it became publicly known that Sony wasn't taking care of their systems, and so people started going, well, hey, if the Sony Online Network, which is their prize online crown, wasn't protected properly, I bet this
what about all these
one-off
little
site.
ancillary things, right?
And then you go for it for public credibility, don't you? To it's sort of like a modern day graffiti in a way.
Yep.
And the other thing that I find interesting is that if it's 10 different groups, you'd think by now that a big public disclosure of information that was taken would have leaked out. I mean, I know we've seen some things here and there, but
a lot of the hacks, the more recent ones, have been fairly small,
true.
like 2,000,
Embarrassing
8,000
kind of
records
stuff.
at a time. But yeah, some of them have been publicly disclosed. Mostly it's just that journalists and so on, when they receive the information, that proves that Sony was hacked, but they don't release that information because it's people's private information, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to be adding to the people's identity theft problem.
So Metal Freak in the chat room thinks that if Sony would have just left Linux on the PlayStation 3, then this most likely would have prevented all of this. Like that was the domino that fell into piece that kicked all of this off.
Right, but it doesn't excuse the fact that these websites were horribly insecure.
No.
They would have got hacked eventually. It's just it would have taken longer because people would be looking at them less.
But do you kind of agree with the conclusion that the spark that started the fire was that? I mean, and the reason I say I kind of agree with Metal Freak is because I look at it as what kicked off the community to really focusing on hacking and jailbreaking the PlayStation 3 was the removal of Linux. You know what I mean? Like that was the whole thing that sort of unlocked the keys where they found out how it works, and then they were able to find out how to access the network, and then once the network was hacked, then it became this big public thing, and that's really what snowballed it, don't you think?
Yeah.
Man, what a bunch of fools. And I got to say, I don't want to pat myself on the back here, but I totally called this on the Linux Action Show, not to this scale, but I totally called it that this community is particularly, these people are people that know how to break systems. That's why they broke the PlayStation 3. And if you piss them off, they just turn their attention onto you.
Exactly.
Now, the downside, I think, to all of this is I think we're going to see a massive crackdown from the federal government and from other jurisdictions for this kind of thing, because Sony can clearly point to this attack cost us XYZ millions, and if this was a brick and mortar store where people came in and smashed our windows and took the information out of our cash register or whatever, I don't know, they would have a law enforcement case here, and I think they're going to take that same thing and set it up and try to use that, and the feds will try to use that to push through lockdown legislation.
And they'll get away with that, but technically, under Canadian law anyway, it was Sony's job to protect that information in such a way that people can't do that.
Well, there's
a law called the Personal Private Information and Electronic Documents Act that requires that they, keep those files in a locked room in locked filing cabinets, right? Or if you're using computers, it has to be encrypted at least this high. And if you recycle the hard drive, it has to pass at least this many passes with a erasing program certified by the RCMP or the NSA or something to that effect.
Right.
Like they have specific laws that have existed since the 90s about the way you handle your electronic records. Well, the enforcement is a little weak, and corporations are not forced to follow the laws that they should have to do to protect the customers.
I believe some states in the U.S. have that, but I don't believe there's any federal-wide law.
Right. And most of those laws put the onus on the company to protect your information.
And to self-audit. Most of any law that I know of in the U.S., and this is just from my experience of working in the banking industry, is all self-auditing. And then in the case of the banks, there's a follow-up FDIC audit that's done once or twice a year, something like that. But, you know.
Right. And well, even for accepting credit cards, there's the PCI DSS, the data security standard. But unless you do at least $250,000 a year in credit card transactions, then you can self-audit.
So.
And it's like 2 pages of forms you fill out and sign. And
you know,
it's
like,
yep, secure.
All it takes, it doesn't matter if you do 100 transactions a year or 100 million transactions a year. All it takes is exactly the same mistake that Sony made, where you just don't patch your shit.
Well, when we get down to that part of the story, your jaw will hit the floor with
Really?
how bad Sony was doing at this.
Really?
Yep.
All right, well, tell me, man. I'm curious, unless there's something else you want to cover.
First, I want to just do a quick rundown of what was taken in the 10 separate attacks.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So
yeah, if we have that.
The first attack was the PlayStation Network.
Right.
Right? And they compromised that and stole a bunch of records, including possibly credit card information. And then they also compromised Sony Online Entertainment, the computer side of the PlayStation Network. The next one was SoNet, which is an ISP owned by Sony. And they have some system of virtual currency, and a bunch of that currency was stolen from users' accounts. So users paid for online e-credits of some kind, and the hackers stole those. And depending on how they modified the database, it might not be that possible for Sony to figure out how many points you had before this. There's not much detail on what
You've got to be
exactly
kidding me.
The resolution is there, but people's electronic point currency balances were affected.
I also heard that they almost immediately after coming back online, the PSN network had their like some sort of deal where you go to reset your password, and
right,
it was
that's number 6.
That was easily compromisable. I mean,
right. They had a page for when PlayStation Network came back up. They had a page where you would go and reset your password.
Yeah,
but it didn't validate the second factor it was asking for.
Oh my gosh!
It didn't stop you from doing it a second time. So you go reset your password, but then somebody who stole the database or knows your email address goes and resets your password again to something you don't know now. And now they have your account.
They obviously don't have the internal processes in place to make security a priority.
They had somebody whip up something really quick and put it online to try to get it over with.
And they don't have anybody review it.
Yeah. Because it was just basic stuff that anybody that's remotely competent should have been like, no, you can't do it that way.
God.
And I'm not saying that their people aren't remotely competent. They probably said you can't do it this way, and the executive said do it anyway.
I hope so.
That happens a lot.
Or they don't have the right people, the right experienced people working on it.
It's entirely possible.
Yeah. I mean, that's sad, dude. That's so sad.
Sony Thailand had their site defaced, and it was replaced with a credit card phishing scam. So the page was modified to look like an Italian credit card company, and then they started sending, phishing emails sending people to this site. With enough, legitimate sounding names in the URL, people will accept it.
Yeah.
Right? When it ends in Sony.com, you're less likely to think it's a scam than when it ends in something that...
Dude, it's Sony.com.
Yeah. Well, it is Sony.com. Whatever the one for Thailand is.
It's funny. You just change a little thing, and it's easy to trick me. Really, it's easier to trick somebody than you expect.
Yep. And then the next thing that was compromised is back in 2001, Sony had an online sweepstakes where people would enter and they give away some prizes. Well, they never got rid of that database, and it got left laying around on some web server somewhere, and that got compromised.
Why would you get rid of a database? I mean, because you could use that information later. Right?
Well, how about not leaving it on an insecure server?
Yeah, take it offline.
For 10 years. Right? So anyway, all the contestants of that Sony sweepstakes had their personal details leaked.
Wow.
That
just shows bad maintenance practices. That's just bad maintenance practices right there. Jeez.
Yep. And rules about data retention and stuff, right? If you're going to store people's personal information, you have to protect it. You can't just leave it laying open.
That's the responsibility you take when you decide to do that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you.
Then Sony BMG Music Greece had their website hacked, again using SQL injection. They managed to dump the entire database, about 8,500 usernames, email addresses, passwords, and phone numbers. So that opens those people up to all kinds of stuff, especially with their phone numbers.
I always cringe when a website asks for my phone number, too. I'm like, this does not seem
over in Europe, they have like huge amounts of people. People use their cell phones as payment devices, for premium text messages, all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah, premium text messages.
Yeah, it's ones where you pay $1 every time you get it.
Why would, instead of having a text messaging plan?
No, premium text messages. The site that sends you the message charges you.
Oh, you're saying they could get automatically signed? Oh yeah, where it charges your bill.
You sign up for like services that will tell you like the latest sports scores or whatever.
Right.
But
or weather alerts.
Yeah, but they charge you $1 a day or $1 for every message.
That's
or something
stupid.
Ridiculous like that.
Yeah, that's really stupid. Yeah. I love that somehow text messaging has become like this premium commodity that must be charged these insane rates when it's cheaper than a phone call for the phone companies.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So
and then,
continue on, sir.
So in the show notes, we've got listed of the people that have taken credit for a bunch of these attacks.
Yeah.
Usually they take credit right in the defaced page, so you know that it was authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Then Sony Music Indonesia was defaced. The website was just replaced with a static message being like, ha, Sony stupid kind of thing. Sony Music Japan, again, SQL injection attack, and credit was claimed by lulzsec.
Lulzsec. Oh, isn't that adorable?
Yes. Security firm all about the lulz.
Is that really their slogan? The security firm all about the lulz?
Probably. And then Sony Ericsson Canada, which had an e-commerce site where people would buy cell phones. And 2,000 plus usernames, email addresses, and hash passwords were stolen from there. Again, they used SQL injection to expose the database, and credit was claimed by a Lebanese hacker group.
You know, I don't want to, this sounds kind of weird. I mean, I'm glad the numbers aren't higher than this, but it's kind of funny. Like, Sony Online Sweepstakes, 2,500 users. Sony BMG Music, 8,500 users. Sony Ericsson Canada, like you just said, 2,000 users. Now, that's, you know, you add all those up, that's a lot. But I'm surprised that it's only 2,000 users in that case. It seems like these are big companies. It should be a much higher number.
Yeah,
it just speaks, I think, kind of to the fact that people aren't really interested in their offerings. That's all. I'm just saying.
Well, it
adds up. It still sucks,
I think it's just that the information is so fragmented, right? Every time they redesign the site, they start a new database or something.
Right. They distribute it everywhere. And so then there's all these spots.
And they have all these open security holes, basically.
And they have a wide attack surface.
Yeah.
And it's being exposed right now. That's pretty wild.
Specifically, what has people so concerned about this is that Sony hasn't notified the customers about that yet. The only reason people know that this server was compromised is when the group claimed credit and they went
defaced
to
the page.
The media. And they went to the media and said, look, we have this database of all these people's information.
So do we have any information?
So when I was writing the story yesterday, Sony as of yet had not made any comment on this compromise.
Okay. So no information from Sony yet.
No. And so the Canadian government had some comments on that. So the Canadian Privacy Commissioner, who's in charge of monitoring things like this, said that they hadn't been contacted by Sony about the recent one at Sony Ericsson Canada, and that they were not proactively notified by Sony about the PSN and SOE breaches. They found out through the news rather than from Sony directly.
Oh, no. Why
and
are
under
they doing
Canadian
this?
law, when there's a data disclosure, you're supposed to tell the Canadian Privacy Commissioner first before you tell the media.
Yep.
And as you start notifying the customers.
Oh, my gosh. Wow. So Sony is in really a lot of hot water. They've got to go through and reevaluate their entire architecture is what they've got to do.
Yes.
Yes, they've got to fundamentally bring all of this under one house's responsibility, so that way it's just a standard unified thing across the Sony company. So
the interesting thing that came out was that the people that hacked the PlayStation Network and SOE released some screenshots of their Nmap scans of the Sony servers.
Oh, so we got some details on what they were running.
Yes. First thing, they were using OpenSSH 4.4.
4.4?
The current version is 5.8.
Yeah.
The version they were using was from September 2006.
Yeah. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And see, the thing is that's so atrocious about that is...
Some OSs won't upgrade the version number. They'll just apply the security patches only. So,
but on most systems...
Maybe it wasn't quite that old, but...
Yeah, no, I mean, on most systems, no, they usually rev the number, really. And really, on most systems, too, doesn't OpenSSH run as root?
Yes.
So if you don't... So you have a system that's listening to a remote connection from the internet running as root, I wasn't sure on BSD if it ran as root. Running as root that is not patched. A service designed to accept incoming connections.
Fully publicly exposed. If you're doing a really secure system like SOE or PSN should have been, not just anybody should be able to SSH into it.
No,
right?
Of course
Your
not.
SSH should only be through some private VPN or something.
Right, absolutely. Or only accepting from certain host names, or only accepting SSH connections with people that have keys would be, I mean...
And things like that, exactly.
Wow.
They were using Apache 2.2.10, which is from October of 2008.
Yeah.
Now, the latest version is 2.2.19, but that's newer than the Sony hack.
Yeah.
And so is 2.2.18, but 2.2.18 was...
they're years newer than the Sony one.
Right, but it had a problem with it. So anyway, they should have been running 2.2.17 from October 2010, which was the most one up until a couple months ago, or a couple weeks ago. But no, they were using one from 2008. And there were known vulnerabilities in 2.2.10.
You don't just stop
with... that would do a local denial of service attack and like exhaust resources on the machine, which probably made the PlayStation Network really easy to take down with that denial of service attack.
Yeah.
And there probably were some buffer overflow ones in there too that would allow them to execute arbitrary code.
Well, you think about when you do your own updates. You don't just stop with, I'm not going to do the Apache update. I'm not going to do the OpenSSH update. You do all of your updates. So if those aren't patched...
And those are probably the two you do first.
Oh, absolutely. Of course. Anything listening remotely, taking remote connections from anywhere, you patch. But there's probably, I mean, see, the thing is those will get you on the box. But if you're not patching the entire system, then once you're on the box, whatever utilities there aren't fixed, you now have local access to. And that's generally how you can get yourself into a really nice spot.
You can usually do all kinds of much more sinister stuff once you have an account, once you're logged into the machine, even if it's not as a privileged user.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is going to be really interesting to see. Now, I know Sony, the one thing Sony has said publicly is they have security researchers looking into the entire event.
Right. They have people coming in doing forensics and trying to find out who did it, not telling them that... I'm sure they already knew that they... Right? Security experts told them months before the PlayStation never got hacked, hey, you're running atrociously outdated software here.
Atrocious.
You need to patch your shit.
Yeah.
It's not that complicated a concept.
No. What a shame. I mean, what an avoidable shame. Literally a shame. Like they're going to be shamed out of this.
It's despicable.
We've got a lot of notes on this in the show notes. Is there anything else you want to touch on in the show?
Nope. I think that's the rest of it is better if you just read it. If
it is the great little notes and stuff that you put in there, Alan. Excellent job on that one.
And the full-size version of that infographic is really good too.
Yes, check out the infographic. I just teased a little bit of in the video version. All right, Alan, what do you say we move on to the Q&A section? All right, Alan, our first question comes in from Adam, and I'll read it here to you. He says, is there a simple way to handle email encryption in Mozilla Thunderbird? Boy, that's a great question for right now. What are your thoughts on that?
So what I use is a plugin for Thunderbird called Enigmail.
I've heard of that.
Machine. And it basically is an easy way to implement GPG, which is the GNU Privacy Guard, an open source version of GPG or PGP, which most people have probably heard of. And it's cross-platform. So it works. I use the same Enigmail plugin on my Windows machine as I do on my BSD machine.
Yeah.
And it uses the native GPG client.
Now, Enigmail's been around for years. That's a really well-trusted Thunderbird plugin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just firing off GPG. So
right. And there's GPG plugins for Outlook. There's GPG plugins for OS X Mail. And so the nice thing about that is you don't have to change your entire encryption program if you eventually want to move from out of Thunderbird for some reason.
Right.
So that's a great way to go. Yeah. And it's pretty slick once you get it all set up. It's really...
And so to install it on Windows, you can just get GPG from their website. They have a little command line version for Windows, and that's what Enigmail will use. Or you can get, there's GPG for Win, which is it includes a bunch of GUI tools to let you like manage your keys, generate new keys, set your trust level on other people's keys, and all that kind of stuff.
I like that, dude. That's a really great pick.
And there are similar tools for Linux, right, to do it with a GUI instead of just command line.
I know there's tools for. I think Enigma works under Linux, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So Oh, you mean outside of Thunderbird? Yeah, I also...
Right, like you want to manage it for other things.
Evolution has built-in tools, so if you use the Evolution mail client, and I also believe Kmail does as well.
Exactly.
But really with Thunderbird...
If you're using your keys for things other than email, too.
Really, for Thunderbird, though, Enigma Mail is definitely the way to go. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter Mac OS 10, Windows, or Linux, and it's just awesome.
Exactly. And it just works.
Yeah, it's been my favorite. Next question?
Well, no, just a couple other things. Just with email encryption, it's important to understand that it's only useful if the person on the other end supports the encryption, right?
Right.
When you send an encrypted email, you're not encrypting it with your key. You're encrypting it to their key. So you use their public key to encrypt the message so only their private key can read it. So then they open it up with their private key and then they can read it. So most people don't have that set up though. So, but you can still use Enigmail and set it up just for signing.
Mm-hmm.
So what it does is when you finish writing the email, it takes a hash of the whole email and then signs that, encrypts it with your private key to your public key. Right, because your public key you publish on like your blog and you put it in the key servers and so on. And anyone can use your public key and check that signature. And if the signature is valid, that means that they can be absolutely sure it was you that sent that email, and they can be sure that the email has not been modified in any way in transit.
That is really key.
That's very important.
That's really key.
I know, right. Emails that come about security updates that come from FreeBSD are always signed by the FreeBSD security officer's key.
Why don't companies like Sony and Bank of America, why don't they GPG sign their emails? So wouldn't that sort of correct the phishing attempt? Like if it doesn't come GPG signed from those companies, you know it's not them, and it wouldn't be that hard for services like Hotmail and Gmail to integrate that in.
It's just a blob of ASCII text at the bottom of the email. If you don't know what it is, it wouldn't be that confusing.
It's just ignored. It doesn't break the email to have it there. It's just you don't. Right. If you don't have the software to read it, it just looks like garbage underneath the signature.
3 or 4 lines under the signature of gibberish.
And then if you do have GPG support,
then you can be absolutely sure this email came from somebody that has this key.
I cannot believe nobody is doing this. I mean, these companies, this is exactly what they need for phishing attacks.
Companies do need to do this, yes. But there are some people that do, like people that are worried about people pretending to be them and sending other people emails pretending to be them will sign their emails so that you know that this came from the real so-and-so.
Right. I used to do it. I used to do it for all my emails. But I don't know. So many people don't support it on the other end that I just kind of stopped. I gave up.
Yeah, I kind of got away from encrypting my email because my phone doesn't support it.
And Gmail doesn't support it, and I've used Gmail a lot these days.
There used to be a cool Firefox plugin called FireGPG. Well, the plugin's still there, but it's not updated anymore. That would let you do GPG encryption in your Gmail. But Gmail would change so often it kept breaking it.
Yeah, if anybody knows of one for Chrome or Firefox 4, I'd love to try doing that again. I've considered going to a mail client just to get it back.
I still use FireGPG in my Firefox to encrypt blobs of text in our online billing system.
Are you using Firefox 3 for that? Or does it,
yes.
So it doesn't work with 4?
I don't know if it works for 4 or not. I think it does.
I'm all about the Firefox 4 now, man. I've moved on. I gotta have my new tasty bits. All right, anything else on email encryption before we jump to the next one?
No, that's about it.
All right, so the next email came in from, Distoburl. I don't know how you say that.
Distoburl.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. He says, since Dropbox has proven to be plagued with security design flaws, what about other services like Woala?
Yeah.
What do you think of that, Alan?
Woala, it used to be almost as bad as Dropbox, but their flaws were mostly just implementation and not design flaws. So the FreeBSD security officer, I'm not sure if he was asked to look at them or if he just did it because he was building a kind of competing product and wanted to see. But anyway, he looked over what they said they were doing and then looked at the client and saw what it was actually doing and pointed out a number of problems that they had.
What's the product that the BSD guy's making?
His is called TarSNAP.
TarSNAP. Oh yeah, we talked about that last episode actually.
Yeah, it's not really that related. It's a backup program.
Yeah.
And it only works for Unix, and you can't buy it if you live in Canada for tax reasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now the interesting thing about
sales tax.
Woala is that it's, in my opinion, is that it's made by LaCie, which to me is kind of like, I don't know. Whenever a company whose core competency isn't the service they're doing, I always kind of stop and question anyways.
Yeah.
So you're saying they had security issues?
So they had some fairly major ones, but they have since rectified a lot of them.
So is it a recommend then?
Not exactly. So I have included in the show notes are 3 links detailing over time the changes and the responses from Mooala. But specifically, they used to make a lot of the same mistakes that Dropbox did, but theirs were less severe than Dropbox's. So the system wasn't fundamentally flawed, so they were able to fix it. With Dropbox, they really can't fix it without kind of starting from scratch and losing some of their unique features, specifically deduplication.
Right, and
if you encrypt before you send it to them, you can't really deduplicate.
So that means Mooala can't take advantage of the deduplication stuff since they are encrypting at the client side.
Right, but it's far more secure because of that.
Right, for the user, it's better.
So they learned a lot of the lessons that Dropbox is learning now. They just did it 4 years ago.
Interesting.
It's hard to believe it was that long ago, honestly.
Yeah, it really is.
But really, what people should take away from this is that when it's something that's in the cloud or even just online, if you really want secure backups, you have to understand what the issues are that mean what could be a problem with this, and decide how much you trust the claims made by the service. Right? Dropbox claimed they encrypted your stuff, but it turns out they encrypted it once with their key.
Yeah, and sometimes with these hosted services, it's hard to do your own investigation. So sometimes you kind of have to go off what they tell you. I mean, you can't.
Exactly. And so if they're not being transparent about it, maybe you shouldn't trust them.
Raku Dave in the chat room hooks me up with some very interesting information that I did not know. He says that Walua or whatever is not actually owned by LaCie, but actually it's been created by some Swiss tech college grads. And I guess maybe LaCie is just like a financial backer or something.
Well, I think they just bought it afterwards.
Okay, I see.
But specifically, Mooala was making claims about using military-grade encryption. There is no such thing, right?
Yeah, we've talked about that before too. That's just kind of a buzz term.
Yeah, and so there are too many buzz terms, too much marketing, and not enough real security.
Yeah. All right, ready for the next question?
So you just specifically, do a little research and
as much as you can. Watch TechSNAP. That helps. Watching TechSNAP always helps.
Yeah.
All right.
Just decide how much you want to trust them.
Enough done. I'm done self-plugging. Yeah. Well, and I'm still using Dropbox, to be honest with you. Again, though, I'm making a very... In fact, I just recently decided that there was a file that I was tempted to put in my Dropbox that I feel I'm within my fair use to own and keep a backup copy of, but it's not necessarily that whoever now monitors Dropbox would feel that way. And now I kind of have to think in those terms because it's no longer me making the decision what I put in my Dropbox. I feel like I have to sort of try to prepare for who might be watching and now try to plan that way. And so I've already made steps of not putting certain things in my Dropbox. And as soon as that starts happening, Alan, I start going, you know what? I'd be up for a replacement. If something came along to replace this, I'd switch. Because I don't want to be in that position. Okay.
Exactly.
Next question comes from Dreams Void, and I like this question a lot. Here we go. Dreams Void wrote in, who was often in the chat room, and said, I'm building a home file server to go under my bed. That's kind of interesting, I thought, right there. It will have 5 hard drives, but I'm concerned about cooling versus noise level and power usage. Yeah, especially under the bed could get warm, I would think. What do you think, Alan?
Yeah. Well, there's a few basic principles to consider when you're cooling a computer. The first is the airflow. You want to make sure that you're drawing cool air in the front and exhausting the hot air at the back, right? And you want to maintain a consistent direction for the flow of the fresh air through the computer. So you want to make sure your components aren't blocking it and you don't have fans trying to turn the direction the air is going. You want to kind of have a consistent flow from one side to the other.
Yeah, maybe like, pull in from the front, blow out the back kind of a thing, so that way everything flows across the components.
And just be careful about things trying to blow sideways and anything like that.
Yeah, a lot of cases will have like side vent fans and stuff that I'm not so sure about. Now, a lot of the cases I've been buying recently have all come with top venting too, so I don't know.
Well, yeah, in that case, if you're, sucking in the front and the top and blowing it out the back, that's fine. Just got to make sure that
I suppose if it is drawing, right, if the top ones are drawing, that'd still be good. Yeah. I think they do.
Yeah, and they're sucking in, and that is pushing more out the back, and that's good. It's just, you have to make sure that all the air is moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Specifically, you want to make sure the front intakes have access to plenty of fresh air, right? So you don't want to put it too close to the wall or something. Specifically under your bed, you don't want to throw your socks in front of it or something.
Yeah, and watch for dust buildup too. So
yes,
you know,
specifically dust and other debris that would clog up the intakes.
You know, I have a PC right here down by me, and the fans have like a nylon cloth over them.
Yeah,
which is really nice.
Almost like a sponge. Very undense sponge.
And then that prevents that stuff from getting in onto the components. It builds up on that screen, and I just clean the screen every few months, and then put it back in. And
you need to be diligent about cleaning that screen, otherwise it gets crudded over, and you're not getting in as much air and stuff.
I keep it in eye shot, and that's the only way I know to do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's out of sight, out of mind.
But also, what something people tend to be bad for is making sure that you have enough room for exhaust. Right? Don't shove the back of the computer 3 inches from the wall, because it's spending its force blowing the air out the back, but then it hits the wall and scatters, and you get a buildup of heat at the back of the computer. Right. You see that, especially with people that have desks that have a little cabinet for their computer. Yes. They have the desk right up against the wall, and they're sticking the computer in a little cabinet.
It's like putting it in an oven.
A little oven.
Yes, it's an oven. It's exactly that. Yeah, as a consultant, there's so many machines that I've worked on, like little tiny compact computers put in these, like literally the brand old compact computers put in these little boxes. I hate that.
I remember when they first came out with the small form factor ones, and then we'd have CAD engineers at the power plant putting 22-inch CRTs on top of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the base of the monitor was wider than the computer.
Yep.
It's like, poor little computer.
It's just being smashed. And the CRTs are super heavy. The chat room is asking where I got that nylon cloth stuff. My computer case just came with it, and a few of them have. But really, honestly, it's literally nylon works. If you can figure out a way to fasten it to the front grill of your fan, make sure you bring it on the intake side of the air. That works. There's a lot of other little solutions and tricks out there to do it too. That's interesting.
But yeah, specifically, you want to make sure that the machine's not tight against the wall, so it has room to breathe. Get that exhaust. Right, if the fan's blowing with so much pressure, you can push that exhaust, a couple feet away instead of a couple inches away. Then it's going to cool the machine better.
Yep, absolutely. And what do you think about noise, though, Alan?
Yeah, for noise, there's a couple things to consider. If you can use wider diameter fans, like bigger 120 millimeter,
120 millimeter all the way, or 160, yeah,
as opposed to using 60s and 80s.
Yes,
then you can push more air with less of a buzz.
Number one thing you can do to, in my opinion, if you have an air-cooled system and want to reduce noise, larger fans, because the larger blades can spin slower and still move more air. So
same amount of air.
And so when those larger fans are spinning slower, they're not cutting the air as fast and as rapidly, so they don't make as much noise.
Yep. And then you get more flow noise and less motor noise.
Yep. I have a huge case here in the studio that's driving your Skype call, and it's actually pressurized, like the way that pulls in. When I turn that computer off and the fan stops spinning, and nobody believes me when I say this until I do it, because this computer runs 24/7. But every now and then, like when we reboot the equipment in the studio before a show and we have the studio full, I'll be like, okay, everybody, stop talking for a second. Check this out. And I shut down the computer, and you literally feel pressure relieved from your ears. It's not loud, but there's a pressure.
Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
So when you go to buy a fan, there's 3 important measurements to look for on the package. There's the airflow, which is usually in cubic feet per minute. Right? That's how much air it moves in a minute. The air pressure, which is usually measured in how many millimeters of water can it lift.
Right.
Or displace. Right? Because if you can get more pressure, then that forces the air through more resistance.
It also
or pushes it further away.
I believe more pressure is also more likely. I don't know why, but I've read that it means less dust also in the case.
I think so, yes, because the air doesn't have, dust doesn't have a chance to land. It gets pushed.
I think that must be it, yeah.
And then out or something.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then the last one is the decibels, which is usually measured in dBA, which is a weighted average. It's because the sound will be attenuated based on how far away you are and how the human ear works. So this is based on a measurement that's meant to be weighted on how it would sound to you, not the actual decibel measurement. But yeah, so most fans now on the case will tell you how much air they move with how much pressure and how loud they are.
Yeah.
And also some of them will list how many RPM they do.
And you'd be
some
surprised.
of them have a range, and some of them have temperature sensors, right?
Yep.
So they'll turn down when there's less heat and up when there's more.
And that is always great too, because you can then, if your machine's not running that hot, you don't have to make a bunch of noise. Right. And really, if you get something that is going to be in the average in the negative 22 decibel range, you probably won't hear it. It's going to be probably as loud. Negative 22 decibel range will be probably quieter than the room you're sitting in. Right. Good chance. So look for something as low as possible.
Normally they're probably around 30, which isn't so bad, but some of the higher performance ones will be higher. It's just you can compare and contrast them and find the one that moves the most air with the least noise is probably what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes the quieter ones don't move quite as much air. So you got to kind of balance that out.
And it's always a trade-off. You can't find one that moves, a ton of air with really high pressure but makes no noise.
Can I? Right? Unless Alan, unless you do this oil-cooled thing. Remember last week we mentioned the oil-cooled data center? Well, someone in the Jupiter colony, I forgot who right off the top of my head, included a link to. You could always go the oil cool route, man, and this data center will do hosted oil cooling for you. Yeah. So there's always something. How about that, Alan? A data center that does hosted oil cooling. There's something, you learn something new every time.
And then the last part of the question was about power usage. Extra hard drives don't make that big of a difference.
Yeah.
Right. Depending on the hard drive, I think my 1.5 terabyte drives, when they're idle, they use about 4 watts, and the max they use is about 8 or 9 watts.
Yeah.
And the main thing is the peak usage. When they first turn on, getting that spindle up to 7,200
That
RPM,
little motor has to work pretty hard.
RPM.
Yeah.
Right. So they can spike to up to 15 watts when they first turn on. And that's why when we talked about the Facebook data center, like episode 2 or whatever, we talked about how they stage and turn their hard drives on one at a time so that all those spikes don't happen at the same time.
Yep. And like Metal Freak points out in the chat room, if you do like something the WD green drives, they use less power, but they're a little slower.
Yes, they're only like 5,400 RPM, but they're desktop drives.
But the thing to remember is
slower and use less power.
Yeah, but if it's a home server, a home server and your main bottleneck is your network connection speed and all your remote devices, and you might not need your drive to read
specifically
super fast.
If you're not using a gigabit LAN, if you're only using 100 megabit or wireless, you're not going to be going fast enough to need the performance you get from faster hard drives.
Yeah, if you're not going gigabit, then don't bother with fast hard drives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because your network will, oh yeah, absolutely. You got to go, and then you start feeling the faster drives.
Push it, right? Because I've actually hit 65, 70 megabytes a second over my LAN.
And that's about the performance, the max performance you would expect from a nice, drive transfer over the network. I mean, it really depends if you're going to a RAID array, then all those kinds of things that maybe you want to do for drives. Also how much
storage you're talking about and what you're using it for.
Yeah.
Right? If you're trying to edit video off it or something, then you want more performance. But if you're just storing, like warehousing data, then slower drives that use less power are probably a better trade-off.
Brian and I on the Linux Action Show Season 13, Episode 2 and 3 did a 2-part show series on building a home server using Linux. If Dreams Void is interested, you can go check that out. I'll link that in the show notes.
Questions about that didn't really fit for TechSNAP, so we should definitely watch that.
Yeah, check that out. And we used a couple of different approaches for that, and kind of curious.
But another thing to consider is most hard drives now will tell you how loud they are as well in dB.
I got this great still of I have a fantasy of building my attic out into a server room, and I feel like it looks something like this guy where it would just be some hokey rack up in my attic. But it just seems like it would be so cool.
Like the one I have in my living room here?
Yeah, nice, dude. You have a rack in your living room.
Yeah, it's
so funny.
It's a long story.
Yeah, well,
I did not buy a rack for my living room, just to be clear.
All right. Now, is that a big old CRT you have on that thing?
Yeah, I needed to play. It's on a KVM switch for all the machines in the rack.
That's great. That's of course you need a KVM for all that.
Exactly.
Now, you have anything else you want to touch on that, or are you ready for my war story, Alan?
Yeah, I'm ready for your war story.
All right, let's get into this. I've been prepping for this for a little bit, and hopefully I'll be able to get it all out there in one piece. So this happened to me about 2 weeks ago, and I'll kind of give you the setup. Now, I made a really hokey visual if you're watching the video version, and so I apologize for its semi-hokiness, but I wanted to have something to show you guys. So what it is it is a gaming server. I don't want to get too specific because I want to protect the confidentiality and all that stuff, but it's a server that hosts an online MMO game, and the way it's architected is it comes in through the internet to the Pier 1 hosting company, and then sitting directly on the edge of that internet connection is the actual host server. And this host server runs two separate VM networks. So one physical host runs a production network and a test and development network, right? And in the video version here, I have this represented by green and red areas. So you have only one actual box in actual service, and then two separate private networks where VMs are isolated in there and they operate. And then that all goes back to a large iSCSI storage array that has two separate volumes on it. One is for the production storage and one is for the test storage. Make sense so far?
Yep.
Okay. So I did not build this system. I just want to put that out there. I did not design this, but I did inherit it. And it's kind of a neat deal. So it's a Linux box. It's a Ubuntu server running VirtualBox 3 something, one of the later in the 3 series of VirtualBox in headless mode, meaning you have VirtualBox but no GUI console. So there's no X11 running on these servers. It's just VirtualBox on the command line.
I use the same thing. And
it does something kind of interesting. This is kind of common in Linux. In Linux environments where you're running virtualization, there is a storage technology that is commonly used. It doesn't have to be used for virtualization, but it's super common when you're doing Linux servers with virtualization, and that is DRBD. I think is if I'm getting it right. I don't know a lot about DRBD other than it is at the block level a network file replication system, so that to the operating system it looks like it's just writing to a hard drive, right? Just something you mount, and it just thinks, okay, well, I'm just treating this like I would treat any other device, and every application on the system is none the wiser that it's actually writing to a file system that's replicated over the network at the device level. So it's super nice in the sense that you don't have to have something that's replication aware, and you can have two systems completely mirror each other. Every write is automatically on the back end in a nice sort of queued system is sent over to the other guy and vice versa, and it's pretty slick. And one of the companies that you probably are familiar with, and I'll bring up their. Try to put a link to this in the show notes actually because it's kind of interesting. Is Evernote, and Evernote is a note-taking. They're supposed to be like your memory extension program, and Evernote has a Linux backend system, and they kind of covered a little bit. They kind of went out, and not too common either to have these companies disclose really how their environment works. But Evernote came out and they said we have 9 million users, 150 million requests a day. And we use DRDB. I mean, it's a well-established thing with their virtualization environment. They have a great overview of their architecture. If you're interested in that, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And DRDB is amazing in that sense. It's a great technology, except for when it's configured incorrectly. In the sense that, on a partition or on a file system, you have your master boot record, and then file systems always have like a little bit of metadata that includes the index of where everything lives on that partition. And then when the operating system goes to read the disk, it first checks this index file so it knows where to go find stuff, right? Well, one of the things that you can do in DRDB is you can have that metadata. So if you have two servers, you can have server A store its metadata for its partitions on server B, and you can have server B store its data on server A. So that way, if one were to die, you have all of the index files, and you theoretically have the mirror, and you just rebuild, and you're good to go. Cool. The downside is when server B is your test environment, and server A is your production environment, and you do stuff on your test environment that you would never do in production because it's your test environment. And if something over on your test environment damages that index file, and then server A reboots with that index file damaged, server A no longer has access to any of its file systems. Okay, that sucks. Not a likely scenario, but it sucks. So here's what happens. When you have it all on one physical host, all it takes is for one drive to die, and you lose all of that for both of them, right? And that's essentially the situation we ended up in. And it got to the point where it looked like, essentially the data is on the drive, but the index for all of that data is gone. So the server couldn't boot, even though everything was there. If it just had that map, if it just knew where that was, it would load up just fine. But without that, you're totally screwed. And we fought it for a couple of days. And of course, it's in a remote data center where we have no physical connectivity to. So we're either troubleshooting with Peer 1 guys over the phone or doing troubleshooting techniques through whatever kind of SSH console we can get. And thankfully, Peer 1, have you ever heard of this rapid recovery console system that they offer? It's like a little...
I use my own hardware there. I don't rent much from them, so I haven't...
Well, here's what they do, and I'm kind of considering doing...
I've had something like it with my other host, though.
Oh, yeah?
I have one that actually gives you... they have like a PixieBoot Linux or BSD environment you can use to recover.
Yeah, that's what they put like a little 20 gig hard drive or something in here that you can boot from. And on there is some basic Linux, really slimlined Linux system that basically all you do is you mount your broken file system and get in there with VI and fix things. Yeah, it's all you can really do. But that really was what eventually ended up saving the day, because we were able to get the other server back up and running from a backup. We had that stuff on backup, but even getting to that point took days, recovering that index file and then being able to boot the systems. And it literally, the timing was getting so tight on it, because again, this thing hosts an online game, and so while this was down, the game was down and they weren't generating revenue. So it started to become sort of a critical thing. And so we were able to recover that index file and then get the other server drive mounted and then boot the production system. But the atrocious thing in all of this was that the production system ended up being dependent on the test system, which is such a mistake. And then combined with all of these little things that weren't finished, like starting up the private networks for the VM so they could talk to each other, and all these little things that had to be identified, because the system had ran for 200 days without being restarted. So there's like these little init scripts that were never finished, and of course I'd only had the system for a couple of weeks, so I hadn't really identified all that stuff yet. I mean,
that tends to happen a lot, especially with systems that run for a very long time, is that they don't come back up properly because so many things were only changed in the running config and not the boot config and so on. Yeah,
you got it. And then combined with, the saving grace was backups, but the backups weren't that great. I mean, we had that file system metadata, and we had a database, and we wouldn't have had a lot of the web files and flash files and things like that for the website if it wasn't for devs having SVN checked out on their desktop. I mean, that's what it came down to. The end of the day, we almost weren't able to restore some of the critical components of the entire service, except where we got lucky and devs had it sitting on an SVN checkout on their drive. I mean, that was freaky scary. So, I mean, talk about one way to find out that, A, the metadata for this system is stored on your test system, and B, your backups aren't working that great. I mean, what a couple of stressful days. And it really, until that dev came back and said, oh yeah, I do have these files, we thought we were going to have to start some of the parts of the site over from scratch. It was after like 3 days of downtime. So
your SVN repository should be on the top of your backup list.
Yes, exactly. Well, and it was supposed to be. See, this is the other thing with not using you're a fan of Bacula and I'm a fan of Backup PC, but my predecessor was just a fan of writing his own bash scripts, and no reporting, anything like that. And so when they die, the backups would just die silently, and it was just an FTP backup.
Your backup system is useless if you don't test it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, once a quarter or more, do a restore to a virtual machine or something and make sure everything works, right?
Yep.
Otherwise, all you have is a backup and not a disaster recovery plan.
Yep, exactly.
There's a big difference between the two.
And it's funny because that point I had made several times coming in, and it's like, we really... funny enough, I had a kind of heated email exchange about 2 days before the system crashed, saying, you're not backed up. And remember, I had talked to you about backing up, and literally I was talking to you about that just a little while before this entire thing fell apart. Like I was actively trying to and they were just not moving forward. And now, of course, it's top priority. Now that we've felt a little pain, we're gonna move, we're gonna act. And it's like, no, you guys, you should have done that before the pain.
Yep, so, and then you wouldn't have felt the pain.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the other thing, is that when you save people's ass with this kind of stuff, they don't appreciate it because they don't know what it could have been like if you hadn't been there.
That's just it. It's like you guys got so close to not having your website back. Like you got. I mean, it's no exaggeration when I say there was probably a 10-minute time period where within the next 10 minutes, if we didn't have something, we were just going to move forward. Like it got down to that kind of time window. Mm-hmm. And it was just at the last minute that it was a complete 180 and the day was saved. And it was super lucky, and it's such a lesson learned. I'm just I wanted to note down all the things for this so that way I could sort of use it as a case study in the future when trying to convince future clients to act a little faster.
Yep.
Because it is and that's one of the reasons why I documented it here for TechSNAP and been thinking through it, is I really want to use this as a case study to say, boom, this is what could happen, and it got really close, and we were lucky. Because it is when you do actually manage to save the day, quote unquote, it does reduce the pain, and it does often result in them not taking it quite as seriously. And I know it's a mean thing for me to say, but it's just been my experience.
Yep, that's exactly.
Yeah. Alan, is there anything else we want to cover in this week's episode?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
All right, cool. So we want to get people's emails. Send those over to TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com. Let us know everything you think. I wanted to give props to Neen in the chat room, who went over to the Jupiter colony and did the math behind using submerged servers and why that actually makes a lot of sense for cooling. And then also Blisk in the chat room says he finds it ironic that while Evernote runs on Linux and has the Linux infrastructure, and they even have an article talking about how their Linux infrastructure has made their product even possible, yet they don't have a Linux client. Kind of seems like BS to me. Maybe Evernote should work on that one. So if you'd like to join us live, we do these live right now at 1 p.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv. But like we mentioned at the top of the show, we're looking for your opinions on that. So head over to our Facebook page at facebook.com/TechSNAP and vote in when you think would be the best time to do TechSNAP live. We've got a couple of options up there, and we want to hear your thoughts. All right, Alan. Well, great show. Thanks for joining me today. And thanks to everyone out there for joining us. We'll see you next week on TechSNAP.